Will democracy survive the next couple of years?
Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now, in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence, with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Hello, and welcome to Access to Democracy. It is so great to be back in the studio after 18 months of virtual interviewing. I'm Dane Smith. I'm a former newspaper journalist in the Twin Cities, also a former executive director of Growth and Justice, an organization focused on practical progressive policies for our state. And our guest today is someone I think you'll find very interesting. His name is Richard Logan. He's the immediate past president of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. I think most of us know something about Judaism, about Jewishness. I think many people may be a little less certain about what humanism really is. I just called up Wikipedia's definition. I thought it might be a good starting point. And Wikipedia defines humanism as a philosophical stance that considers human beings as the starting point for serious moral and philosophical inquiry. It goes on to say that the term refers to a focus on human well-being and advocates for human freedom, autonomy, and progress. It's also defined as typically non-religious and aligned with secularism, and as a non-theistic view centered on human agency. Richard, how does that square with you as a humanist and what it means, what the term means as you practice it, as you lead in this?
Well, you know, it squares very well with my work, a lot of it in Africa as an anthropologist. And one of the things that I think everybody should do is base their beliefs on things that we know. And I would say that one of the things we know is that the world is the way it is because of what humans do. I also think we know that humans have the capacity to reason, that humans have the capacity to find evidence to determine whether a belief is true or not. If something is true, there has to be evidence for it. It seems to me that's obvious. So that's part of the way I look at humanism. As far as humanistic Judaism, humanistic Judaism was founded by a former Reform rabbi named Sherwin Wine, spelled W-I-N-E. He was based in the suburbs of Detroit. And he increasingly was questioning whether there's solid evidence for the divine. Mm-hmm. And so he founded a movement that was really providing Jewish community for secular Jews, and that movement was based on the richness of Jewish culture. And of course, Jewish culture historically includes beliefs in God, but also beliefs that there is no evidence for a supreme being.
Well, this is fascinating. I think because when you hear criticism of humanism, if you've heard it, it's probably come from a very religious perspective, often from the Christian right, that humanists are anti-God, anti-religious, and yet here you are, a Society for Humanistic Judaism. Judaism is obviously part of the Judeo-Christian heritage, so it's interesting to see how you reconcile being religious and being viewed as non-religious.
Right. Well, I'm not anti-religious. I'll be very candid. I have very strong issues with the fundamentalist versions of all of the world's major religions, the way they put down women, the way they deny science, and so on. But as a humanist, I don't go around, say, telling some elderly Catholic woman that what she believes isn't true. I mean, that violates a humanistic principle of having empathy for others and so on.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. So, no, I think my understanding of humanism is to be affirmative. Now, if we find solid evidence that there is indeed a supreme being, I'm not going to strictly hold on to my humanist beliefs. By the way, I'm going to just add for the audience that my father was a Methodist minister. My grandfather was a Methodist minister. I was steeped in the Protestant religion as a kid.
Tell us a little bit more about your biography. I'm intrigued by the African experience. Quickly tell us how you progressed from being the son of a Methodist minister to a humanistic Jew.
It's interesting. My father was a Methodist minister. To be truthful, he probably should have been an academic because he was very, very scholarly, extremely scholarly. And I think I got my bookishness from my father. I got my motivation from my mother, but I got my bookishness from my father. And, we lived in a series of small towns in far upstate, I mean beyond Yonkers by a long stretch, far upstate New York and Vermont. And I had a pretty good education. I was fortunate to go to an Ivy League school. And for some reason, I gravitated toward a group of 3 secular Jewish guys who had been educated at Peter Stuyvesant High School in New York, and they were my roommates for my 3 years as an upper class person. And they really opened my eyes. That plus majoring in anthropology was one of the things you realize in anthropology, and you study different cultures around the world and throughout history. There have been hundreds of ideas about religion. Right. At most, only one of them can be right, correct?
Yes, that was part of my epiphany too. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian faith, Jehovah's Witnesses. So at 17, I remember just waking up one day and thinking, can this possibly be the only true religion? Just a few million of us in a world of billions. And so I actually understand a lot about humanism myself. And one of the things I've always been intrigued about is a lot of times you'll hear conservatives say that it's anti-American humanism, secular humanism, and that this recognition of the world, of other people in the world as being our equals or not inferior to us is somehow that's somehow un-American. I think that's maybe a little slanted way of framing it, but I think that is at the heart of it. And I just wonder how you respond when people say that humanism is anti-American.
Well, one of the things that is very anti-American is to claim that I'm sorry I'm losing my train of thought here, but one of the things of it that's very anti-American is to deny that people have the right to a range of beliefs, including humanism. If you look at Thomas Paine, for example, a very influential person in the American Revolution. He was very, very secular. The Constitution of the United States is very secular, and it has to be in order to institutionalize in government the fact that people have a right to a range of beliefs. And so people who claim that humanism is godless are also the same people who say that we are really a Judeo-Christian country. But our form of governance was born out of the Enlightenment, and one of the features of the Enlightenment was reason, science, the belief in the competence of the individual. One of the features of the Enlightenment was that until the Enlightenment, or shortly before the Enlightenment, because of a lot of historical changes happened for over a couple of centuries there, the Pope was the Emperor of Europe, and also the Pope was the Pope and the bishops and the monarchs were the only people who had brains. But with the Enlightenment came the understanding that ordinary people have the capacity to reason together, together democratically, and that's how democratic institutions got established. But I think the core point is that our Constitution gives people the right to have a range of views, and governance is set up to be neutral on religion, and that's why God is not mentioned in the only document that is a blueprint for our form of government is the Constitution.
That's it.
That is it. That is the only document, and that document is entirely secular.
It says nothing. Says nothing about God. Actually,
right.
It says nothing about Jesus for sure.
Right. And by saying that it's secular, is not to say, and this is vitally important, to say that it is secular is not to say that our Constitution is anti-religion. It absolutely is not.
Right.
It is very intentionally neutral on religion and neutral on beliefs broadly. And so therefore, and how does democracy, one of the ways democracy ties into that is democracy is a debate among differing points of view, which means debate among people who have different beliefs about things.
Right.
And that is, that was such a revolutionary idea to come into being on the heels of centuries of European life where the Pope was in charge of everything.
Right. And of course we all know
and the church and so on, yeah.
And we all know that the country was settled by people who were intent on forced conversion.
Right.
And in many cases, well, of course, enslavement, and in our own nation, up until one of the great ironies of our supposedly free country and where freedom of religion is paramount, is that we were still trying to convert Native Americans as recently as the 1930s. Not trying, forcibly forcing it.
There were cultural realities that did not go along with the very thoughtful work that went into crafting the Constitution. And some of these cultural realities were the idea of dominion, that European nations have the right to claim territory just by having somebody, one of their agents, plant a flag on a new piece of land.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What?
And slavery and a whole lot of other things. It doesn't mean that just because the founders were enlightened doesn't mean that all the people who came here were all that enlightened.
Right. Talk a little bit about, there's an expression that all politics is local, and I think that phrase could actually be applied to all religion and philosophy. That the inquiry, this moral and philosophical inquiry, leads to action and specific things in policy and what we do every day. What kinds of things does the Society for Humanistic Judaism involve itself in locally here in Minnesota?
Well, some of the members of the local congregation here for Humanistic Judaism, Or Emet, that's spelled O-R and the second word E-M-E-T, it means the light of truth. Or Emet does not have that name because members believe that we have found the truth. We have that name because we are seekers of truth, using the tools of science and reason. Another feature of the humanistic Jewish approach is the belief that human beings, in reasoning civilly together, can create principles of ethics and morality. And therefore, one of the things that Or Emet works on quite a bit, and I think all of the humanistic Jewish communities across North America work on quite a bit, is social justice. The most active committees in all of these communities across North America very often are the social justice committees. So you'll find us campaigning. We set up a whole huge initiative, and we've gotten funding. We've gotten some funding to further this initiative. It's basically the Jewish version of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. It's Jewish people united for separation of religion and government. And one of the things that the Jewish people have benefited from by being in this country is the freedom to pursue their religious beliefs or their non-religious beliefs,
Right.
which is another feature of the Jewish world and Jewish culture, is the number of Jews who are what are called non-observant in the Jewish world, but otherwise we might call secular. I don't think there's a great deal of anti-religion sentiment, certainly not on my part, certainly not on the many people I've met in leadership across North America.
Right.
It's more that we're trying to be affirmative about what we believe to be true.
Yes, I don't see a whole lot of difference between the Society for Humanistic Judaism and mainstream Protestantism. Much of the thought and leadership in the Catholic Church is like-minded.
Yeah.
I happen to be a member of a Unitarian Universalist church. This all resonates.
I know it well.
With me, and I think there has been for a long time a consensus that the things you describe, humans working together to improve our condition, to equalize unfair outcomes,
To further democracy.
that this is the model that works best. Most of the industrialized democracies in the world today have this kind of framework, and yet we're seeing a reaction to it, and in Hungary and Poland and Russia, so many places where you see the rise of illiberal democracy.
Right.
And it concerns me sometimes that maybe what humans really want isn't a place where people can argue, but where everybody is like them and thinks the same way. And it turns out that once you get a majority of people thinking this way, you get these new autocrats that are rising.
You know, it's a rebirth, speaking as an anthropologist now, it's a rebirth of tribalism, and tribalism being defined as really only valuing people that you can see as of your kind.
Right, everyone else is the other.
And everyone else is the other. And there's, you know, I think one of the factors here is that the modernity is very dislocating.
It is.
And so that's a whole other dissertation to talk about all the ways in which the modern world is dislocating. And so people want to grab onto something more absolute.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why you see the fundamentalist religious reactions across all of the world, and even Buddhism.
Yes.
There are radical fundamentalist Buddhists who've been killing Muslims in Southeast Asia. We all know that. And but you know, you mentioned mainstream Protestantism. there's an immense overlap between the values and the actions of humanists on the one hand, and the values and the actions of mainstream Protestants, progressive Catholic leadership, liberation theology,
Yes.
and so on, peace movements, support for science. One of the things that's a huge dividing line in all of the world's major religions between the fundamentalists and the others who are more open-minded about things is the fundamentalists absolutely reject science, and the other branch of that religion totally embraces science.
Or at least science that comes into conflict with certain tenets.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've touched on something there. I do think that there is a human yearning for certainty. And I think many people don't find humanism satisfying because it's an open-ended kind of question, and it's essentially an embrace of the mystery rather than an explanation for it.
Yeah, and one of the things that humanists do is humanists are constantly practicing democracy. Humanists are constantly debating
Amongst themselves.
Amongst themselves. And again, I just want to underline the fact that there's, in my experience, which is fairly broad considering the various places I've lived and the different institutions I've belonged to, there's very little outright anti-religion. I mean, I have a great many friends who are humanists, both Jewish humanists and not Jewish humanists, who deplore radical fundamentalist atheists.
Yes.
Because you know, if you're an absolutist, you're not really interested in continuing the journey of inquiry, right?
Yeah. At its heart, I think humanism is a spiritual quest. It's a peering into the cosmos, a wondering, and I think at its essence, it fulfills this human need to want to know why.
And we have a great many members in the Humanistic Jewish world who are very spiritual beings. I have many friends for whom that's true.
You go through some of the rituals, right?
Right, and of course a lot of these rituals had their origin in the practice of the tenets of a faith.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that those rituals and ceremonies don't have cultural value, social value,
right,
brotherhood and sisterhood value.
Yes.
Meaning, a sense of meaning and purpose value.
Right, and a sense of community.
And community, and
right.
That is, I think that, frankly, we face a crisis in our country now. It is so hard for people to live in real community. I think that's one of the reasons some people retreat into fundamentalism, because otherwise you can be awfully anonymous in the modern world. If you just take a large apartment building and look at how few people in a large apartment building know each other.
Right.
I mean, just as one model for thinking about it.
Well, I think that humanists, seeing humanism as itself as a sort of religion is a way to think about it for folks who are interested in humanism. My minister used to say at the beginning of every service that the place where we meet to seek the highest is holy ground. That could be said of a state legislature's meeting or a academic institution. It's all about seeking.
Yeah, and it's also all about lifting up the potential of people to be good, to do good, to see each other as fellow human beings and not as others with a capital O,
right.
Which is one of the things that bedevils the world today.
And yet, there are many philosophers who observed how mean and nasty humans are, have been, can be, will be.
Right.
We are the first man born to woman in the Bible killed his brother
Yeah.
over a difference in how to worship God, by the way.
Right, and you know, I have a great many Amish friends, and I think the Amish. I worked very closely with an Amish community for 10 years.
Very much peaceful people.
Very much peaceful people, very much good and decent people. But one of the first things they'll say is that they're flawed, and the second thing they'll say is that we try to better ourselves. You know, one of the things that the Amish are a fascinating group because they live according to this principle called joy. It's called J-O-I. And what that means is Jesus comes first. The other person, the other comes second, and I come third. And so what they're saying is there's something larger than myself comes first. There are many ways of talking about what that larger than oneself.
The J
can be.
could be something else,
Yes,
right? The J could be the universe, or
And exactly. And you know, and the idea too, I think a great many of us could come together on the idea of lifting up the potential of human beings. That's a core humanist principle.
who would you recommend for people to read, or just kind of a reading list for people who are interested in learning more about humanism?
Well, in terms of humanistic Judaism, I would strongly recommend any of several books by Rabbi Sherwin Wine. He struggled with what to call a Judaism that was based on Jewish culture and was built to serve secular Jews and not religious Jews. He struggled with what to call it, whether you call it cultural Judaism. He landed on humanistic Judaism because so many of the values resonated with the world of humanism that was already out there. So Sherwin Wine, and he has several books. And then if you look up humanism, you will find, you know, if you look at it, humanism, one of the things that's interesting is that over history, say if you go back to the Renaissance, humanism had one kind of meaning, in more recent times it has other. But certainly you can read a Martin Buber, and you can read many people, some of whom were religious.
Anybody who terribly that's more contemporary, folks somebody who's alive now, other than the Jewish scholar?
I'm sorry, I don't.
It's sort of.
But you know, that's something.
It is sort of everywhere, actually.
Yeah, and you know, you can find. I should have had a list at the top of my head when I was preparing for this. But.
Well, this has been fascinating, and I just real eye-opening insights into philosophy and history. I hope we can do this more times. We'll work on the team here to bring us back.
I'd like to interview you. I'd like to interview you.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Dane.